minute, y'all don't listen to me, but please.
Okay, all right, man.
I know.
I'm going to listen because I want y'all to give her a hand. Give this sister a hand. Long time ago, a guy named Frederick Douglass, I know who he is, he said, if there is no struggle, there is no progress. Repeat after me. If there's no struggle, there is no progress. Now, there's going to be people telling you that protests don't work, but we got proof. Y'all know and I know that they weren't going to put Derek Chauvin, they weren't going to fire him, and they sure weren't going to put him on trial if we didn't take our behinds to the street. Am I right? So that tells me that if they give in when we take to the street, then maybe we should keep taking to the street, right? Somebody told me that, you know, if you don't fight, you can't win, right? If you don't fight, you can't win. But if you fight, you can win. If you fight back, guess what? You can win. If you fight, you can do what? Win. If you can fight, you can win. If you 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 fight.
It is hard not to be angry at white people, at injustice, at stories not told, not heard, the stories we don't get to hear. It is hard not to become my anger, to see everything in red, black bodies in pools of red, black bodies lynched, black bodies hanging from the ties we lost to our motherland, lost in this country that we were forced to call home, constantly made to feel other and less than in a place that we built as slaves, whipped as slaves, branded as slaves. And after all these years, we're still not free, trapped behind these bars of modern day slavery.
Police officers started out as slave patrols, trying to catch so-called fugitive slaves.
Slave patrols in the 1800s were organized, authorized white men who were allowed to track down and make arrests of slaves who were perhaps on the run or who were even considered to be in a place they shouldn't be.
It started out as the cavalry, and so the cavalry would come in and they were there to round up indigenous folks, they were there to round up runaway slaves, and they were deputized to go after essentially people of color that had no business living lives like white folks.
There are still traces of that today. Of course, we have a different system, but law enforcement today is still predominantly white, and they still operate predominantly in communities of color, and they still can stop and search and sometimes arrest people for very little suspicion of criminal behavior.
Now, the 13th Amendment was supposed to abolish slavery. But if you read the language of the 13th Amendment, it essentially says, I'm paraphrasing, neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall be allowed, except if one has been duly convicted of a crime. And so the 13th Amendment actually empowered these men to come into communities of newly freed enslaved persons and use the law to their advantage to round up primarily black men and to bring them into the justice system. This was only made possible because many southern states changed their laws on the books after the end of slavery in order to make standard behavior by black men a crime. So if black men were hanging out late at night, unemployed, talking too loud, spitting on the sidewalk, all those things would be justification for police officers and sheriffs to come into the community and bring them into the justice system. At the end of the day, the folks who profited were the state as well as the companies who hired these black men. So it was like entering into a whole new form of slavery after the enactment of the 13th Amendment, and law enforcement was crucial in making that happen.
To know that the origin of police in the US is runaway slave catchers and slave patrolmen, that shows you what they wwere about from the get. And the question that I would submit to the people watching this is, if the cake is cooked with, if the cake is baked with, rotten materials, can you ever make a good cake? So if those materials from the ground up are all ready to predate, publicly execute, and criminalize black folks, what do you think you're gonna get?
The hate you give to black students is reminiscent of the past. Things they won't teach you in school, so let me take y'all to class. First, let's look at segregation. Black and white were supposed to be given separate but equal education, but we know it never lived up to those expectations because they always found a way to implement discrimination. And when the justification of color was no longer acceptable to be separated, they protested and sent death threats to black children who were integrated. Now they're threatening school boards over critical race theory, upset that they might teach real history of how they participated, because if you unmask the Klansmen in class, you see it's no real mystery that this system is what they created. Now your school ain't got no money, and there's no activities for you to express yourself, and they don't have staff on hand to help you with your mental health. So when a black girl gets picked on, you have nothing to offer her. There's no resources, but the school got money for school resource officers. And when a black boy acts up, you have nothing to offer him, except for the cops in the hallways who won't keep their hands off of him. And if we take it back to the Emancipation Proclamation, we said abolish slavery, but they reformed it to incarceration.
If I had to give a synopsis of the school-to-prison pipeline, I would say that it has become a system that allows the almost seamless integration of police officers from the streets and into schools. Now, the justification for bringing police in schools started with the mass school shooting that happened in Colorado, where two young white boys went in, shot up a school, killed many people, and suddenly there was this push to bring officers in schools to protect children from mass shooters coming into the community. Now, we know that these things weren't happening in the Black and Latinx community. However, the schools in our communities are being overwhelmed by the presence of not only police officers, but the fact that police officers have become the de facto disciplinarian in those environments.
I see it play out in things like kids getting arrested for disorderly conduct instead of just having a sit down with the principal. I see it in the increase in police officers actually present in schools as opposed to school officials handling disciplinary matters.
These zero tolerance policies came into play, and it wasn't necessarily about the policy, but how people enacted those policies, right? So again, when we have this anti-Black belief, it plays out in how we apply those policies to situations, right? So we know that that gave leeway for people to say, oh, a kid did this, they have to get this consequence, and that consequence is whatever the zero tolerance was, be kicked out of school, be it referred to law enforcement, right? Those sorts of things. But we also know that those things came out harsher when it was dealing with Black students. And so that's the issue with zero tolerance policies.
It kind of puts this narrative that if you're bad in the classroom, you're going to be bad outside of it. And whatever discipline they think isn't working in the classroom, well, there's only one kind of discipline out there, so puts them right into another system. So they're not really being able to break these chains.
When I was a child, if children got into a fight, maybe they're disciplined by the teacher, maybe they're sent to the principal, maybe their parents are called, maybe they're suspended. That's the end of the story. Nowadays, if a child gets into a fight, they could be led out of the school in handcuffs and charged with assault and battery.
When you have Black kids that are not being served in school, not being listened to in school, they feel there's nothing there for them, and they act out, the school takes punitive measures. We gotta expel your kid. We gotta suspend your kid. We gotta take him to detention or something. There's nothing rehabilitating about it. It's punitive. Now that kid feels dejected, he feels ostracized, so you engage in survivalism. Now that survivalism has been criminalized and you find yourself in the judicial system.
Our neighborhoods have lack of funding, rec centers, just activities. A lot of times if you've taken the father out of the home, he's dead or he's in prison, you got a single family home. You got a mother raising a child by herself. She's paying all the bills she can't afford for her child to do activities that a white privileged kid with two parents would be able to do. And a lot of times, young Black men, they may get out here, they might sell drugs because they're trying to help their mom pay bills. Well, he gets caught, he goes to prison. But this is the life for our children. And I think it's been designed and critiqued and created like that for a reason and purpose, and that's white supremacy.
That's my life. I've been in the justice system since I was 10 years old. My first time ever going to jail or anything like that. I was 10 years old, riding my bike to school here in South Minneapolis. My reality was when I was 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old as a black boy walking to the store, one of the possibilities, the jump out boys, that they're gonna jump out, hands up, they get to frisk you. It was normal. So this happened to me when I was 10 years old. They pulled up on me, asked me my name, I told them my name. They came back and told me I had a warrant. I'm 10, I'm like, what's a warrant? It means you're going to see the judge, buddy, which means you gotta put on these handcuffs to get the back of this car. Never forget that, spending that day or two there in those cells, never forget that. And I'm saying, to this day, still to this day, I say here as a 35-year-old man, I am still on Minnesota probation or parole. And ever since that day, I have been, right? So all the way throughout my adolescence, from 10 all the way up into 18 before I went to prison, I was on some type of juvenile parole, probation, and most of it was rooted in truancy. Truancy was the gateway for me in the system. And the reason why I didn't go to school much was not because I didn't like school, but because I come from a house full of crackheads. My clothes ain't clean. I just moved. We gotta move again. We don't got no phone. Nobody in my house worked. Back to how it destroyed families, to your prior question. Nobody in my house worked. We just grew up in generational poverty. So school ain't like a real top priority in my life. When I was young, and I hated school because I felt like they were speaking a different language than what was going on in my house. But they'll give you this thing called truancy. And you go to jail for truancy. So from 10 all the way up into 18, I had some type of interaction with the system to the point where when I was in high school, there was a time when I didn't really know the difference between my guidance counselor and my probation officer. Your school plan is your probation plan. So if you mess up your school plan, your probation officer and the police at your door. So yeah, that's a little bit about the school to prison pipeline.
Black children are in prison from the moment they walk into the educational system. In order for anybody to learn, their conditions, their environment has to be conducive to that. What our children get is educational trauma. If I put all these stereotypes on black children that they cannot read, that they aren't good students, that they don't succeed, when they go into the classroom, there's all this pressure to prove them wrong. So there's no safe space to even make mistakes. And then when they make mistakes, they don't have teachers there to receive those mistakes and use them as feedback and in the lessons to push them further. They use it as a form of humiliation and a way to label them. So then when you then label them, what happens? It's an excuse to discriminate against them. They become special ed, they become EBD, they become all these labels that then say we have the right then to segregate you, to say you are incapable of this, and so they go throughout their whole educational career not believing in themselves. This educational system takes away our black children's self-esteem, sense of self, self-determination, and replaces it with dependency, right? With miseducation, with punishment, all the things that says that you deserve to be locked up. You don't deserve goodness in this life.
I know so many BIPAC students who have changed drastically in a good way since 9th grade. They're now seniors, actually getting their lives on track, and administration still have them in that tiny box that they created for them since 9th grade, and they just won't allow them to grow and be what they have the potential to be. It's always assumptions, like we're up to no good, stereotypes, false narratives. Society adultifies us. It's not the same treatment that white kids receive. Black and brown kids aren't allowed to have a bad day. We're not allowed to get poor grades without being called idiots.
Most of these officers don't have specific training in working with young people, nor do they have cultural competency much of the time. So why are they being placed in a sensitive environment where children are trying to grow emotionally, psychologically, as well as get their education? It created a lot of hostility and unnecessary trauma and abuse.
But they don't just target black men or target black women, so they also found a way to target our black children. They are over-policed in the schools, with black boys and girls more likely to be in detention, in or out of school suspension, more likely to be in foster care or the services of child protections. Black codes turn into dress codes like it's the new Jim Crow. So when you get in trouble, they ship you off. Now orange jumpsuits are your new gym clothes. And when you realize this education is to teach you how to fit into their system, the desire to learn goes out the window when it kills all your ambition. You make the decision that in class you ain't gonna listen, and that's when you get sucked into the pipeline to the prison.
11-year-old Taisha Edwards was shot to death when a stray bullet came into her South Minneapolis home while she was doing her homework. 16-year-old Mayan Burrell insisted he was not involved, but he was convicted of Edwards' murder in 2003 when Klobuchar was the county attorney.
I'm Mayan Burrell, Mayan DeMarlo Burrell, spelled Mayan M-Y-O-N, DeMarlo D-E-M-A-R-K-A-R-L-O, Burrell B-U-R-R-E-L-L. My father moved to Minnesota from Omaha, Nebraska, like maybe in the late 70s. And my mom's family, her whole family's from here, from Minneapolis, Minnesota, North Minneapolis. I've never seen anybody, known anybody personally who have experienced the trials and tribulations that my family have went through prior to me going through what I've been through in my life.
It's 5 of us. Our older brother, Larry, then we have Michael, and then it's me, Mayan, and Martrez. So we all were raised in the same household until in 2002 is when Mayan was incarcerated falsely, accused for a crime he didn't commit. And when he was fighting for his life, our mother died within a couple weeks of him being
incarcerated,
being arrested.
My entire youth was spent in the justice system, in the criminal justice system. That day, when I went up to Portland Foods, it was early in the day, and I sensed something off, like it was just something didn't feel right. I remember just looking outside and seeing like unmarked squad cars. I haven't done anything wrong, so I didn't have any fear.
3 people are arrested, including Mayan Burrell, who was 16 years old at the time.
Long story short, I ended up getting kidnapped. And that was the last place I seen a free world for nearly 2 decades. I remember being forced into the back of a police car and being pulled around to the other side of the block on 5th, being taken out of the unmarked squad car, put into a police squad car, and hauled into Hennepin County Jail as a 16-year-old child. I remember the devastation and just feeling like lost. And then for like the way that they were talking to me, it was like I was actually like public enemy number 1 or something.
It was shocking. It just wasn't fair. And even to this day, we still don't understand how, why.
I just was lost when he got, incarcerated like that, when they took him. It seemed like I couldn't think, couldn't sleep. So every day he was in there, I was feeling every day he was in there.
Burrell, shown here being interrogated by detectives, always maintained his innocence. A panel of experts led by St. Thomas professor Mark Osler said in a report filed earlier this month that Burrell's sentence shouldn't just be shortened, that he should be released immediately, something community activists also support.
What the Associated Press investigation, what Robin McDowell's investigation showed, and what the independent panel saw was that there were always questions about whether he should have been identified as a third person. We know that there were objective witnesses who identified someone who looked nothing like Mayan as the shooter, people working on adjacent roofs. We know that both co-defendants have now said Mayan didn't do it. One has admitted he was the shooter. We know that in his second trial, in which he was convicted by a judge, that the prosecution, the Hennepin County Attorney's Office, relied on 5 to 6 jailhouse informants whose testimony was provided in exchange for deals on their own cases, and at least a few of whom have come forward to say they lied. We know that there is no direct forensic evidence tying Mayan to the gun or to the scene. There are no ballistics that prove that Mayan shot her. I don't know why things went down as they did, but I do know that there are a lot of holes that a lot of people have pointed out through the years, and that an independent panel has said raises a lot of critical questions about his conviction.
It showed that he wasn't innocent till proven guilty. He was guilty until proven innocent, like most definitely.
It made me not trust the system at all. You know, they tell you to trust the process. I don't trust it at all. I don't care what you try to put in and try to fix it. It just seems like it's there for a cause, you know, to damage our type of people.
That system was designed to dehumanize people and to turn them into something other than a human being. Talk about injustice. Like, if you want to talk about the criminal justice system, like, you could go and look at the facts of my situation. Look at the facts of my case. Look at all the police misconduct. Look at all the lies. Look at all the falsifying evidence. Look at all of these things, and then go back and research and see if even one of these people were held accountable for the injustice that they imposed on me.
There's no aspect about taking a 16-year-old and sticking him in a cage for 18 years that isn't inherently dehumanizing.
If you ever had something stolen from you, then you can relate to the experience that I went through. Just imagine somebody stealing something from you, and every day you have to watch it. Like, you have to look at something that belongs to you, and you got to watch it like deteriorate in front of your face and be powerless to do anything to take it back, and you telling the whole world that that's yours, and everybody's saying, nah, you forfeited it. I had to watch everything that I knew, everything that I understood about life actually disappear in front of my face and be powerless to hold on to it. When I was coming up, it wasn't abnormal for police officers to just roll up and rough you up for no reason, just because you were together, you and your friends was walking. That was my first interaction with police officers, was them coming up and victimizing me as a youth. Like, it wasn't even looked at as being something that was outside of the norm. It was just to stay away from the police because that's what they do. And it went in stages, so ultimately it led up to them falsely incarcerating me and sending me to prison for a crime I didn't commit. But it started with that in itself was the criminalization, by saying that these people are this. So even if somebody drove by in their car and they seen some little black boys being roughed up on the corner, they didn't look at it as being a bad thing because they were roughing up those thugs, or they were roughing up those super predators, or they were roughing up those gang members. You know what I mean? When Tyisha Edwards was murdered, I believe that people took it upon themselves to use that as a means to push their own political agenda. And so even though you weren't affected by the trauma that was in my community, you could see so many people could see the hardships that we were experiencing. And so they took that and they said, you know what? These people are they're in a state of desperation. They need help. So I'm gonna come and I'm gonna make it seem like I'm helping these people, but in reality, I'm using them as a means to victimize the other people of their community. Okay, now you got this 16-year-old boy that nobody took the time out to even ask, like, what happened? Like, how did this little boy end up in prison? Like, how did he end up in the county jail? Is this evidence adding up? Nobody took it, but it was just like, no, he's been demonized, he's been criminalized, he's no longer a human being, so he's not a part of us. You know, and you use the same community that was in complete despair, you know, and in pain from their loss, and you use them, you harness that pain and that energy, and you use that as a means to be able to push your own selfish desires.
We're grateful. Like, it was nice to see that other people believed in his innocence, and that they were willing to fight. Even though they didn't personally know him, they were fighting with us and side by side. So it was a blessing because we've been doing the fight so long by ourselves. So I think that really made a big impact and brought more attention as well. So giving up wasn't an option.
This is laying the foundation to justify the mass incarceration of these youth that are out here in the community. They're not looking at the source of the problem that created the conditions that made them want to go out there to a completely different community and do the things that they're doing. And if you never address the problem at the source, then history is going to continuously repeat itself.
It is hard not to be blinded by the struggles of the past, the present, the future, and how society will still see my black before they see my body. Black body, black body. This black body is a curse. Too black for anything good to come of it. Too black to start a movement, a revolution. But that's what we did. We took our pain and suffering and turned it into good, calling for reparations, finally getting back what was lost, taken from us, stolen. It is hard not to be angry at what we've lost, but it is empowering to see just how far we've come as Black people in spite of our Black bodies.
A lot of kids are increasingly being charged as adults, particularly Black boys. Already as a child, they have a target on their backs. They have a juvenile history, and if they do anything as an adult, those juvenile history points are added to their adult criminal points, which means they might spend more time in prison for something that they did as a child.
Our children aren't looked at as children. They got this skin color on their body, they're looked at as thugs. They're looked at as a threat. So even if they're a teenager, even if they're 11, 12, 13, 14 years old, our children is looked at as threats.
They are treated like they're not even human. These are children, but kids who wind up in the juvenile system are not necessarily treated as children. And I think when kids have those experiences, they're separated from their families, they're separated from human touch and compassion, it makes it more likely that they will wind up in the adult criminal justice system.
1980s to 1990s, right? There was an 800% increase of Black women entering prisons for nonviolent crimes, drug abuse because of addiction, which never be incarcerated, and which then leads to them being unhoused. That increase then made it where a large percentage of Black children started ending up in foster care. Around that same time where Black women were being incarcerated heavily, right? Black children were then being placed in adult correctional facilities because of the 1980 and 1990s transfer laws. The transfer laws allowed for states to legally place children who were 15, 16, 17 years old in adult facilities, which then allowed for these states to lose data on how many children are actually incarcerated in adult facilities. Because till this day, only 13 states actually report factual data about how many children are incarcerated in adult facilities.
Just as they do with our young Black men, they do the same thing on the flip side to young Black women, where our children aren't looked at as children. And that they look at our children as, off the bat, our young women, that we're gonna be single mothers raising kids, you know, and they sexualize us.
Adultification specifically towards Black girls, Black femmes, Black trans women is a dynamic that white people and whiteness and white supremacy have projected onto this group of people, and essentially has assumed or created the expectation that these young people are adults and should be treated as that.
Growing up, I just remember I wasn't able to wear the color red nail polish because my mom considered it to be too sexy and that she thought people would be looking at me if my nails were red. Just like little minute things like that. Or we'll see little white kids in crop tops and it's cute, but then you'll see little Black kids in crop tops in the same clothes, even if you will, and now they're sexy.
Black girls are like told from a young age, don't wear shorts around the house, don't wear red lipstick, it makes you look more older than you are, it makes you look like a whore. And it's literally always the same thing as what the white girl wears, but I'm just like perceived as like more sexual because of my curves. Black girls have to deal with a lot. We can't dress how we want to dress without being called a hoe or a bust down. And society adultifies us, and then the minute we decide to take on that role, we're called every bad name in the book, like you just want to be grown.
There's different ways of that adultification comes into play, but specifically in schools, you think about dress code, for example. In my experience, sometimes Black girls have a different body shape than white girls. Maybe they're a little curvier in some spaces, or a little taller, a little wider, whatever, however you want to look at it. And then some white women are not built like that. But two of the girls the same age with different body types have on the same exact outfit, the black girl gets more sexualized, she's adultified, shaming, someone for growing too fast, or parents not being able to afford clothes as fast as their body is going, or being able to fit something last week and this week you can't.
From my experience, I was suspended, or I had to go in the office and change, and I kind of refused to. So I was kind of sent home for the day and suspended because I refused to change my outfit. It was literally just shorts and a tank top. Same thing as what the white girl wore. But they told me to go home and change, and I refused. And later on, as I was learning about who I am I am not a white girl. I'm a black girl who's curvy. I just learned that it's always gonna be 10 times harder for me. It's always gonna be 10 times harder for black girls, because society adultifies us and sexualizes us. And it's things like that that are really degrading, and the degradation, it hurts. Because I know I went through that so many times.
When I think about mental health issues, domestic violence and abuse that black girls experience, it increases the likelihood of adult drug addiction as well as cycling in and out of the justice system. I think about Centoya Brown, who is a young black woman who was recently released from prison, who was sex trafficked as a child and killed her abuser. And she was treated like a hardened criminal even though she was a girl. And it took so many people, celebrities, politicians, people advocating for her to finally be released. And she's not alone. There's another young black girl in Kenosha who was trafficked, who killed one of the men who was involved in trafficking her. And she has been sentenced to many years in prison. And people are comparing the treatment she received as a young black girl who was abused and who responded to that abuse to Kyle Rittenhouse, a young white boy who inserted himself into demonstrations, killed 2 people, severely wounded another, was tried by a jury, primarily white jury, and walked away scot-free. And so when you think about the treatment of 2 young people involved in the system, we still see harsher punishment for a black child in that particular system.
At the end of the day, it's our babies are still children too, and they should not be expected to grow up faster.
It took the murder of George Floyd, which happened on May 25th of 2020, for the Minneapolis public school system to finally decide to remove police officers from schools. But why should it have taken watching a public lynching of a black man in order for Minneapolis public schools officials to know that they had a problem? There have been students whose arms have been broken, who've been hemmed up, brought into the system, and none of that was enough to compel district leaders to remove police officers from schools. There is a greater need for intervention, holistic intervention, making sure that kids know how to problem solve and engage in conflict resolution, and that they have productive things to do in their communities. That hasn't been the focus. We would rather spend money to send police officers in schools, not to stop mass shootings, but to hone in on minor infractions by children and to criminalize them as a result.
They set you up to fail, and every step is outlined with discrimination. They standardize tests you to force you into assimilation. They enforce Eurocentric beauty standards so your hair you start to straighten, and they tell you that you gotta cut your dreadlocks to walk at graduation. But I say we need graduation caps that are silk lined, ones that protect hair textures of all kinds, ones that can fit over an afro or a ponytail, ones that don't ensure the curly-headed kids only fail. So no, it's not just hair. You don't get to decide which style I wear, and no, you cannot touch mine. It's the same answer when you ask the first time. Yes, you heard what I said. And Jessica, you need to take them braids off your head. Take the do-rag off, Brad. I don't know what you're trying to do. And Chad, you can take that bandana off too. And Kaylee, you do not need to have your edges laid. They want us to pledge allegiance to a flag, but teachers need to have different pledges made. Forget about a piece of cloth. Let's pledge allegiance to the black students and make their success realistic. Teach them how to use their minds, their hands, their voices to create a future that makes black students optimistic. Teach them to create art. Teach them to love their natural black characteristics characteristics, teach them values that aren't just capitalistic, and create a system that will realize that these are real lives. Black students are not just statistics.
So I don't fit in. That's hell. It's hell when you can't be around your peers. All my life I grew up around black people, poor people, but I can't live around poor people now because they'll rob me. And why would they rob me? Because they're starving, because there's no money here. But they're telling me, now that I made a little money, I have to move here. So it's not like no one's ever trying to deal with this section. They're just moving away from it. And we're gonna have more stars coming from together, but they're gonna all move this way. You know what I'm saying? So it's like all the society is doing is leeching off the ghetto. They use the ghetto for their pain, for their sorrow, for their culture, for their music, for their happiness, for their movies, to talk about boys in the hood. You know what I'm saying? You know, I want when they see me, they know that every day when I'm breathing, it's for us to go farther. I'm not saying I'm going to rule the world or I'm going to change the world, but I guarantee that I will spark the brain that will change the world.
Town's favorite nigga, been that, still that. What we talking about? That's what I'm saying though. Let's get it. Hey, check. Let me paint this canvas for all the ones that don't know where I come from. Full of block, where we the home of the unsung. Stories untold, passageways block, where the old heads made do and set up shop. I got a lot up on my plate, but it's all for where I reside. The difference is my reach expands of the size. Recipes to munch, shit that changed is so far. But through this rap, I vow to keep you alive. We had a few on the way, and a few that made it. I sold game. I kept my suit clean, now I'm the town's favorite. For Shotty Boo, I vow to keep my pen laying. Just trying to get my money up to keep the ground sacred. Look, I'm on a mission with a solid few. For times stuck in pain, we gon' shine cause we supposed to. Tied in, but Big Cuz said I'm too humble. But that's just me, Lil Leak, I got my own hustle.
I wanna see you shine. I wanna see you win someday. Long as you stick to the grind, we gon' bring the whole hood on one day. Niggas can hate all they wanna, but we gon' make sure the whole family's straight. I know that you're the town's favorite. I know that you're the town's favorite.
Yo, I'm all for the dream. I'm all for the cause. I'd rather leave with love cause it don't got a cause. Just keep it real and don't hold nothing back.